to call this meeting of the Bellingham Public Works Public Safety Committee to order. Joining me on the committee this morning is Roxanne Murphy. We are expecting Michael Lilliquist, who will probably be joining us in a little bit here. We have 4 items before us today. The first is an interlocal agreement with Western Washington University's Whatcom Transportation Authority and the city for sidewalk improvements to Lincoln Street.
Thank you. Good morning, Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. The city, the university, and WTA have agreed to construct a sidewalk on Lincoln Street adjacent to the transit center. It's a project that's been in the 6-year TIP for several years, and we anticipate constructing it later this fall. The dollar amounts in terms of the contributions from the other agencies were previously agreed upon, in that Western would contribute $50,000 towards the project and WTA $15,000 towards the project. The city has a contribution as well, and then we have a grant from the Transportation Improvement Board, TIB. As we went further along in the design of that project, we had several changes in scope, which I think were for the betterment of the project, including arterial street lighting and some other minor changes that did increase the scope. We then went out to bid, and the bid came in much higher than our project budget. We had a project budget of about $350,000, and now total project cost is estimated to be around $530,000. So again, that was a combination of increased scope and also, I think, a changing bidding and climate. We're seeing that in most of the projects that have gone out to bid this year, where the low bid has come in quite a bit higher than our engineer's estimate, which is a change. Over the last 4 or 5 years, it's been the other way. So I think we're seeing that change across the board. So we decided that we need to go back to our partner, primarily Western, on this project because the sidewalk is adjacent to their facility, and ask if they could increase their contribution to the project, which they have agreed to do. But there's a little bit more to that, and it does tie into some other things that the city has worked on in the past with the university, primarily the funding of the residential parking zones around the university, the RPZs. So before you is an interlocal agreement that kind of takes care of both of those issues, the funding for the Lincoln Street Center, and also talks about Western's participation in the RPZs moving forward, which they have been very clear about with the city that they no longer want to fund the residential parking zones. They actually don't have an agreement to do that now. It's expired. But as I think you know, historically, the university has funded $25,000 a year for the administration of the RPZs. And over the last couple of years, Western has approached the city and indicated that they're not required to fund the RPZs. It's been voluntary in the past, although it has been identified as a good parking demand strategy that the university has funded in the past. They believe they've made enough improvements on campus in terms of parking supply, as well as other parking demand management strategies, primarily working with WTA to increase transit ridership and offering the student pass. The students voted to pay for that. And so there has been quite a bit that's changed over the last 5 or 6 years as it relates to parking on campus, and the university feels that they should no longer pay for the RPZs. So as I indicated, they're not legally required to do that. Staff's been working with Western, and what they do agree to is that they should be a partner, a funding partner in transportation projects that support the university. And the Lincoln Street sidewalk is a good example of that. It's sidewalk adjacent to their facility. It provides easy access to the transit facility for people living all around that area that might be taking transit to the university. And so we did try to combine these two issues. The interlocal before you says that they're phasing out, no longer paying for the RPZs, but will increase their contribution from $50,000 to $98,000 for the Lincoln Street sidewalk, which I think is a movement in the right direction and a good thing. There are some minor changes since the packet was printed to the interlocal agreement, so I handed out a hard copy to you, and I just want to go very briefly through what those changes are. So if I could bring your attention to section 4, which is Western's responsibilities. And that's where it highlights that their contribution to the project will now be $98,000. The timing of the payments has changed from what was in your packet. In essence, the timing has been spread out over 5 years. This parallels what we were previously negotiating with the university as they were phasing out of the RPZs. We were phasing it out over a 5-year period, and so they wanted to keep that timing of the payment to Lincoln Street. It was what was in their budgeting process, so we think the total dollar amount is the same. Staff is okay with the phasing out. The other change is, if I can direct you to the next page, which is under that same section 4, letter B. There is a current plan development contract between the university and the city that highlights what the university will need to do when and if they ultimately develop the Lincoln Street parking facility. If they were to improve it to put in either structured parking at the ultimate or any other improvements, the plan development contract spells out everything that they would have to do in terms of right-of-way frontage improvements, all of the things that are required from the city's development code and even beyond that. This letter B says that that plan development contract is still in place, and aside from the improvements that will be taken care of as part of the Lincoln Street sidewalk project, which is the lighting that I talked to primarily, that I talk about, everything else university still needs to do. That's what this letter B says, and there's just some minor changes in the wording of that compared to what's in your packet. So, and that's been through legal review, and Matt's here and can speak to that if you would like. So that's generally what's before the council. The next step, if the council does approve this interlocal agreement, is, like I indicated, we've already bid this project out. If this is approved, we'll come back at your next council meeting with a recommendation to award bid for the Lincoln Street sidewalk project. So with that, Eric is here. Eric has been working with the university closely on all sorts of parking related issues, and he can speak to the details in this contract or other issues between the city and the university.
Okay. Any questions, comments, Michael?
I just have one small question in case I missed it. The city's contribution is $147,000. Is that from the street fund or some other source?
That will be part of the discussion next week, but the cities are, and what I did indicate, Michael, prior to you coming in was we have bid this project already, and it came in quite a bit higher than our project estimate. So it was a combination of a higher bid, but also an increased scope. So we recognize that the project did change a little bit in terms of some of the things that we wanted to add since we were out there. What we'll be asking the council is to approve a larger project budget. Essentially, we'll be deferring other projects that are both street fund and TBD funded. So,
yes, Roxanne.
Well, I'd just like to move that we approve the interlocal agreement with Western Washington University, Whatcom Transportation Authority, and the city for sidewalk improvements to Lincoln Street.
Okay. Yeah. Got one comment on it, or a couple comments on it. I'm going to vote to go along with this, even though I think Western withdrawing from the RPZs is a terrible PR move on their part. I was around when we established them. I was around when all the parking problems were happening and attended the public meeting, the neighborhood meetings, and saw the uproar from the neighborhoods about the parking problems. And this went a long ways with one of the starts to kind of smoothing over some of the problems that were going on at that time between neighborhoods and the university. And I know the neighborhoods, Seaholm and South Hill and stuff, are not going to just say, oh, this is a good deal, because it's not. I think they should be continue doing this because, and we don't know what the impact will be, but I do know we're going to set up some meetings to work on the issue of RPZs, so we're not going to just do away with it. And
Yes.
so that part, you know, I'm willing to work on that, but I do want to make it very clear to Western that I think this is very bad PR. I don't agree with this, but I will. The other parts of this are really important, and knowing that we're going to try to work on the RPZs, they're going to stay in place, they're not going away, that I will vote for it.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. The RPZs will remain in effect. The increase in RPZ parking violations the council approved last year, I believe $30 now for a violation of the RPZ. We've been tracking that, and it appears that covers the cost of the enforcement, so that's a good thing. And so what we'll need to talk about moving forward is the administrative cost of the RPZ. And Councilmember Borneman stated this. We have plans to bring back for a future council meeting to your committee to talk about that, because as you remember, the downtown plan also identified RPZs as a potential parking demand strategy for other downtown neighborhoods, and we would like to come back to council and have a discussion about, as we consider implementing RPZs and as we consider how we fund the existing RPZs, how do we want to fund those? Do we want to fund them through existing city funds? Do we want to talk about charging for the permits? There's all sorts of different funding strategies, and that's a good topic for a future committee meeting. But yeah, absolutely, the RPZs will remain in effect. That's not changing.
Okay, we have a motion before us. Seeing no other comments, all those in favor, hands are aye.
Aye.
Okay, we will recommend approval tonight. The next up is a water treatment plant pre-treatment project status update.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to Freeman here, he has a brief PowerPoint. This is a project that the pre-treatment is a project that's been around for quite some time, going back to probably 2011, 2012, when the city completed a larger evaluation looking at the water treatment plant and how we can deal with the source water and effectively provide water to the community. Our plant is a little unique, very unique actually, in that we don't have pre-treatment now. We have direct filtration. The water comes right in off the lake and right into the gravity filtration process without going through some type of pre-treatment. Our analysis has showed that really is something that we do need, something that most jurisdictions have already, and so we're going through the process of design right now. We anticipate being under construction at the end of next year and having something online in 2017, 2018. So with that, Freeman will go through a presentation, and then we'll be happy to answer questions that the council might have.
Thanks, Ted. Freeman Anthony, Public Works. So yeah, we're going to take a closer look at this project and the scheduling. And I also was fortunate to dig into some of the Whatcom's archives for this presentation here. So there's some good old stuff here. So today we'll just cover the project, basically the background to it, and again, Ted covered some of that. We'll look at energy conservation aspects, we'll look at the funding, and then the schedule. History of the project, just basically going back to the plant. As Ted said, it's unique that it doesn't have pre-treatment. It is fairly common to have that now in Washington. Pre-treatment can help a lot with basically your turbidity events, where you have large rain events that all of a sudden you've added a lot of suspended solids. Typically we've been taking those out through our gravity filters, but there's better processes to do that on the front end. For this pre-treatment project, it was specifically identified in the Water Comp Plan update in 2013. We did consider the funding in the 2012 rate study, and so we've had it in our capital budget for a few years now. And I'll go ahead and add that there was some pilot testing that was done. We've been at this since probably 2010 or so, thinking and contemplating what this project was going to look like. In 2010, we did an analysis of the different technologies that were out there via our triple bottom line plus approach. looked at some basic, what could we do for pretreatment? We could do nothing. We could do an intake relocation as far as the source water. We could just add more bays instead of adding the pretreatment, or look at a facility. We piloted a dissolved air flotation system for about 8 weeks in the summer of 2011 because technically that seemed like the best fit, and we were pretty comfortable with the results. Staff also visited a couple sites up and down the coast here to take a look at existing facilities. So what does the pretreatment look like? Well, it's called dissolved air flotation, and we don't have to get into the real nuts and bolts of that, but basically it's a couple pre-treatment basins that allow us to remove the suspended sediment, and we can expand these in the future to 3 if we need. Having 2 trains allows you to run one and take the other one down for redundancy. That's a huge help from a maintenance standpoint. And so that's really, the bulk of the project, both in cost and, technical challenge, is going to be the pretreatment system. When we are up there doing these upgrades, there's a couple other things that we need to add to the scope of the project. One is going to be an upgrade to the chlorine injection system. There's 2 reasons we have to do that. One is, as we construct the pretreatment facility, building permits are needed, and therefore you have to upgrade your building to code. Our current buildings do not meet code for storage of the chlorine cylinders. So that's how you get there. Also, the chlorine delivery system equipment's at least 20 years, or about 20 years old, and it's due time to replace that equipment. It's hard to get parts for those. So that's an added piece of scope to the project that is pretty much exclusive of the pretreatment tanks. And then in addition to that, we're going to put an injection system in for taste and odors. The scope of the project is going to include just the pipe work required for this future taste and odor system. Right now, we've kept it out of the budget just for cost control. I mean, if there's an opportunity there as we go through to put the actual dosing system in, we'll do that. But right now, we're going to put the injection system in, but actually hold off on the actual storage and delivery of the taste and odor. And it's called powder activated carbon. And we have one at the plant now. It's 30 years old and fully non-functional. It's been used to store, it's been used to hang clothing on for some time to dry it, but that's about it.
Freeman?
Yeah.
What would the injection, I know they're not putting it in now, but just curiosity, for taste, what would that look like in terms of what do you do? Put in, take out?
Let Eric take this one.
I'm just kind of curious.
Eric Johnston, Public Works. I like to refer to this as the oversized Brita filter.
Okay.
Essentially, this is a powdered activated carbon, a carbon material that would remove those oils or that cause those taste and odor concerns. Last year, we had a pretty significant taste and odor concern. This is a system that would remove that. In very simple terms, think of it as a very large Brita filter. Rather than the water going through the filter, we put the filter material in the water and then take the filter material out. So
it's a carbon.
It's a carbon-based filter system.
Okay, thanks.
While we're at it, we will basically enclose some parts of the building that are currently open. Part of that's code compliance. Part of that's some improvements just for staff to be able to get from the existing plant control room to the new basins. And at the end of it all, this is our first capital project that will be addressing the 1% for the arts component to it. So that is something we've worked on with planning. We're trying to incorporate the art into the project rather than a big statue of something. And so we're looking at rerouting a little bit of the adjacent trail along Whatcom Creek to be a little bit more natural and to put some signage and some art in that pedestrian experience, but at the same time sort of improving connectivity for the trail users through there. So just to put your head around it visually, here's the existing site. Has everybody been to the water treatment plant? Yep. So as you drive in, on your left would be the new facility. That asphalt there is essentially the existing road footprint. We would move the access gate a little further, south, which is actually helpful because it will sort of contain the site better. You'll be able to sort of see the gate visually from Silver Beach Ave there as you come down. If you look at the rendering there, you'll see there's two tanks, or two linear tank setups. That's the main system. And then the support equipment is the orange tanks to the, on the top there, and then the chlorine system are the white tanks. So a variety of different equipment laid out around the facility there. Access remaining basically the same as it is now. Energy conservation. In tune with our climate action plan, we said, okay, well, what is this going to add to the plant as far as the electrical draw each year? And we got our consultants to quantify that and looked at what the options were around town for water-related or something where we could offset that energy use, maybe efficiency, or maybe energy production. We did look at inline hydro turbines, and we had a look at this probably 8 or 10 years ago. We would love to do it. I mean, we do have a large water supply that is above the city, but the bottom line is it's not really very far above the city. I mean, we have service areas that are above that high water line, and what you really need is you need an impoundment that's 300 or 400 feet above everything, like if you were in Boulder or something like that, where you really had some excess head to lose. The bottom line is we don't have any excess head in the system, and so there's nothing that really works very well for inline hydro. The other thing is we are creatures of habit, and we use a lot at different points during the day, but the flows that go through the pipes to the city of Bellingham, it's not consistent. So you might make a bunch of power while everybody's having a shower in the morning on one line, but then all of a sudden it's not going to do anything at 4 in the morning, so you're not generating power. So those are kind of that's the basic issues with trying to do that in the existing system. In the future, if you have a water user that uses water 24 hours a day and lots of it, that's where you might find that application to be useful. But what we do have is a couple big concrete reservoirs that are well sort of contained, if you will. So we are taking a look at putting some solar panels on top of the chlorine contact tank, which is the larger of those two tanks that you see there. And so this would be in addition to the existing project budget. We'll bring this back to council once we've sort of vetted out what we think we can do. There are some Department of Commerce grants that may be a possibility to help fund this as well. And the idea is, well, what can we do to offset that power use that we're adding to the system? So we'll be taking that back to council when we get a better, sort of scope of what that looks like. And I don't know, Eric, if you have any additional comments on that? Okay. So the project funding, there it is from the 15-16 budget right there. We have a combination of funding sources. We're still using our 2008 water sewer bond. That's basically paid for all the design requirements. We have a state revolving loan fund, or state revolving loan. Will cover the bulk of the funding, and then we look at 2016 water funds or other future funded things basically to take up any excess that's necessary. Schedule. So today, immediately following this presentation, we will ask for a bid award. And the bid award is for the DAF equipment itself. And again, DAF is dissolved air flotation. That's really that's the guts of the whole project. And we've done a pre-selection for the equipment, so we know who is going to be delivering the equipment. It was still a competitive bid. There were two bidders that were both out of Pennsylvania. It's a very specialty type of construction. But now that we have this bidder selected and presumably awarded, then we can work directly with them as we design the concrete structures around it and all the piping penetrations such that at the end of the day we know what we're going to get, and it's not a big design change when you get a different equipment vendor at the end of it all. So that'll be forthcoming today. In October, we'd like to do the same with the chlorine generation equipment, also known as the HYPO system. And that would be, again, a similar thing where we want to know who we're going to get. We're going to bring you a bid award for the lowest bidder, and then we'll work with them through the design. January, looking for a 90% design, and we'll come back to council and say this is what it looks like. We'll have an idea of sort of the ARC components at that point as well. We will have we'll have really our final budget numbers. We can understand if we can maybe bring the taste and odor system in its entirety back into the project, or is that just going to be the injection system for now, and as a follow-up project in the future. Try to bid and award it through the spring, and really try to get going mid-late summer with this one. Right now, we show a March 2018 project online, but the general consensus is we should be able to probably build it quite a bit faster than that. It's not a huge project, and it's not like Post Point, which is close to 2 years. We should be able to do it a little quicker than that. And so, with all that, I will happily take some questions.
Okay, Michael?
I have a question about the project cost. The total project cost is $22 million right now. When the DAF first came forward a number of years ago, it was around $11 million. But this 22 includes not just the DAF, but these other projects. Looking just at the DAF component, how close is our $11 million estimate to the current estimated price for that component?
Removing the hypochlorite system from the project is probably around $1 million to $1.5 million. So right now our total construction budget that we're working with, so not looking at the funding that's been allocated, but what our scope and budget is around $17 million, and that includes everything. So if you strip that out, you're down to, I think, we'll say 14.5. So you've taken out your chlorine, taken out your taste and odor. So you've gone from 11 to 14.5. And really, when you look at the market increases that we've seen, our bids are coming in 25% over. A large part of that is just a reflection of the change in what the market conditions look like from that 11 million that you saw today.
So I guess my question is, when we did the rate study in 2012, we set the rates to be able to afford around $11 million project. Now that it's coming in closer to 14, are we able to fit that into our rate structure, or do we need to sacrifice or delay other projects?
Well, when we did the rate structure, first of all, I'd say that when we first identified the cost of pretreatment was back in that original study, which was the filter clogging study, which I think was 2011. So they are very high level numbers at that time, without really looking at the site itself and what are the challenges of construction. So at that time, at a planning number, I mean, you would expect that the number could go 50, 60% either way at that number. So I don't think it's out of the what we originally anticipated. In terms of the rates, when we look at the capital program, and we adopt a capital program for the 6-year period of when we set rates, and council adopted rates through 2008, we do identify project costs, individual project costs, but what we're really looking at is the total capital dollars spent over that period on the system, regardless of the individual projects. So there's projects that have come off that list, back on that list, because when we set that project, we're looking at the comprehensive plan, the water system plan, and we're looking at capacity projects that we think we may need over the 6-year period. Some of those we won't build because of conservation and the fact that the community is using less water. So we identified tanks that may not need to be built, on King Mountain, for example. And we're looking at the total dollar amount. So when we look at a project like this and we start to better understand the total project cost, we look at the rates, we look at that original capital list, and we're looking total dollars and what are the rates' ability to fund it. And in that regard, we're in very good shape because there's several projects that have come off the list we don't need to build. The other thing we look at is the financing. And so when we did the rate study in 2011, 2012, we looked at borrowing a lot more debt on the water utility than we're likely going to need to borrow. So we also have to look at the debt service. And when we look at the debt service or borrowing capacity in the rate study, we generally plug in a borrowing rate of 5%. Well, as Fritz mentioned, we were fortunate enough to get state revolving fund money for this project, which is about 2%. So the financing alone over the period, you're saving several $1 million over the 20-year period. It's a good question, but what we really look at is total capital dollars, but we also look at how are our operating costs over that same period of time. Total revenue to the utility, and that mix between operating and capital costs were very much estimates at the time we did the rate study, and that's one of the things we do on a quarterly basis. We get everybody together, we look at our finances, we look at the revenue that's coming in, and we adjust things and say, are we on track? We think we are. We're in really good shape. The water utilities finances are healthy. We're happy that we don't need to borrow as much as we originally thought we would. And, you know, this project, when we look at the $22 million, we've got the water treatment plants. I think your budget is actually, you're closer to 19 for these things. We also have screenhouse improvements that we're wanting to do that are outside this project. So when we originally came to council, when we came to council in 2000 for the 2015-16 budget, we said, okay, over the 6-year period, we're looking at a little over $22 million in plant related costs. So
I'll say that's good news, because my real concern is that at the end of the 2018 rate period, we would find ourselves slightly in the hole, and we'd be looking at large rate increases. It sounds like the numbers are working out well. Some are going up, some are going down. When we get to the end of this rate period, we should be where we expected to be. No particular hidden burdens or delayed projects.
that would be, that's what we anticipate. One of the things that's happening over this period that makes it a little unique for us as a utility is this migration from flat rate to metered rate accounts. We made some estimates. We thought about that a lot as we went through the previous rate study, and we identified what we call transitional rates. We don't fully know the distribution of water. We don't know how much all the residential units are using. We had, a subset of folks that were on metered, but we had this 16,000 flat rate accounts. One of the things what we don't think we're going to need is a drastically different amount of revenue than what we projected. What we may need to do in the future, I think, is probably look at the rate structure themselves, and as we get all the data for residential usage, and maybe tweak some of those volume charges and stuff, but the total dollar amount coming into the utility being what we anticipated it would be. So, so it is a little unique with the big migration from flat to metered, but what we're seeing is our revenues are very much on what we thought they would be.
Anything else?
Mr. Lilliquist, if I might just add on to what Ted just mentioned, our goal in managing the utility is a slow and steady approach to rates. What we don't want to see is a big spike at the end of a rate structure increase, either up or down.
Exactly.
But slow and steady and predictable. And our approach to managing the utility is that predictability and stability in that rate structure. Rates will always go up. Our costs always go up. But we want that to be a steady inflationary increase and not a 15 or a 20% increase that's unexpected. And
Exactly,
we are on track to do that.
When we did the last rate, we had to do a little bump at the beginning there to catch up, and it's nice to avoid that.
We want to be steady and consistent and predictable, and we are on track to do that. This project will not affect that predictability.
Okay. Anything else? Well, thank you for the update.
Awesome.
Yep.
So we will see you probably on this project we're coming for the bid award in October, and then we'll have kind of a full project scope report sometime first quarter next year. And so that does lead into our next bid item in your agenda, Bill. So I will just, should I read the summary statement for the good of the order here? Water treatment plant is currently in design phase, approximately 30%. Included in the scope is a dissolved air flotation system, which has been procured early. The city received 2 bids for this equipment, which are opened in public read August 14th. Xylem Water Solutions was the responsible bidder, who submitted the lowest responsive bid in the sum of $986,000, excluding any Washington state taxes. The engineer's estimate was $1,390,000. And it's nice to see that a little bit low. This type of equipment isn't quite susceptible to market fluctuations because it's really more of an in-house fabrication thing. It's not materials intensive. So, staff recommend award of this bid.
Okay. Michael?
Well, the only thing better than the name Xylem Water Systems is the fact that they're located in Zeleenople, Pennsylvania.
Can't say it.
Yeah, I'm going to recommend that the committee recommend awarding this bid tonight.
Okay. Any comments? All those in favor of the motion, answer aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll recommend approval tonight to the full council. Thank you very much.
I'm not going anywhere.
All right. Okay, we got next item.
So this next item is information only. We have been looking at Holly Street for quite a while now. It is in need of resurfacing. But to do that, we have to have a plan to address the intersections and ADA requirements at the downtown intersections where we have the bollards and all of the brickwork, and making sure that whatever we do meets current ADA standards, but recognizing that a lot has been put into the aesthetics of the downtown intersections, and as soon as we go in there with an overlay, it requires us to redo all of the intersections, bringing them up to code. So we've been working on that, coming up with a design, working closely with the planning department to come up with something that meets all the requirements but still provides the same benefits from a pedestrian connectivity, but also something that the downtown neighborhood and the rest of the community will like from an aesthetic perspective. The other aspects of overlaying Hawley is, as part of the bicycle master plan, Hawley Street was identified as a segment that needed further study to determine what exactly should be done on Hawley in terms of a bicycle facility. And so we don't have all those answers yet, but we're going through that process, and Freeman has a brief presentation on where we're at, and certainly there'll be more opportunities for council interaction as we move forward.
Okay, so we will go through this presentation. This is basically the same thing that we provided at our open house for this project on the 19th of August. We didn't have a huge turnout, but Councilmember Lilliquist was there, and that definitely added some good content to it. So today's presentation, we will go through the project scope, and that really is the different design aspects, and then we'll take a look at schedule. And we'll also talk about outreach in here as well. So this builds on the 2016 overlay, this builds on the 2007 Hawley Street Gateway project. So you may remember that, and here's a picture of it. This was actually from one of our brochures. And a pretty impactful project that did a lot of good things for Hawley from Ellis down to basically the State Street, and added a lot of good pedestrian features. So we're going to build on that. The challenging thing with the downtown area is the brick and bollard. We just haven't developed a design standard for that as far as bringing it up to ADA code. The brick and bollard is a unique design aesthetic that is from, I believe, the 80s, and it was a big LID improvement. A lot of public and private money went into doing a pretty impressive facelift to the downtown, and the existing brick and bollard provides a lot of pedestrian space, and I think credit goes to that project and the foresight of that project to really create all these pedestrian bump outs that are there now. So the challenge was, how do we upgrade those and still maintain that, because we don't have the money to do the entire downtown at once, nor would we really want to. So the ADA upgrades you'll see keep that design aesthetic, but upgrade it to ADA and add some nice features. The core of the project is still the resurfacing. I mean, that's really why we're here with street overlay dollars to really get that done. But while we're at it, we will take the opportunity. How are we doing with vegetation? Are there streetscape improvements that could make it a more vibrant corridor? We will be taking a look at illumination, although, as you know, we have an LED retrofit going all over town. So largely, I expect illumination to fall out of the scope for this project. So we'll take a closer look at the brick and bollard ADA upgrades. So this is from our concept plans that we shared at the open house. And, you know, I hate to say it, but there's really, it's kind of boring. We're basically keeping the same thing that we have. What we are doing is we'll be using a white granite paver to serve the purpose as the truncated domes. Those are the yellow pads that you see on sidewalk ramps. Instead of doing yellow, planning said no. You have to do something nice. So we're using some white granite pavers that meet the ADA requirements with the truncated domes. It will be relatively, visually, the contrast will be there, but it'll be less, I guess you might say, garish as the yellow. We'll be relocating and upgrading the bollards. I know there's been some discussion of the bollards. Our intent is to largely keep the same design aesthetic of the existing bollards, but we'd like them to be cast as one piece with a lifting eye for operations. It makes it safer for them to move them around. They're currently actually two pieces of concrete that are glued together, so they can be kind of a chore. They can fall apart and stuff like that. So we're going to make a few upgrades for the maintenance folks. We'll keep largely the same pedestrian footprint that we have now. You know, minor modifications to make sure we keep the minimum 10-foot returns and all that sort of thing. We'll be upgrading a couple of the ADA parking stalls such that they have their own little ramp right up from the parking stall. We have ADA parking stalls. They need to be updated a little bit. And so that's really the bulk of the project. At each one of these corners, there'll be a fair amount of work, and that'll be a bit disruptive. Okay, a lot disruptive. But we'll try to preserve as much of the existing sidewalk area as we can, because that both facilitates movement during construction and it's less costly if we can keep existing sidewalk. Here's an example of mid-block improvements. We'll basically be taking a look at the existing tree canopy, if there's anything left after this weekend, and we have our Parks Department going in and basically assessing trees as their current health. I expect a couple of trees will probably go during this project, and we'll likely replace them with a similar species. Again, we're really going to work with the Parks Arborist on what parks would like to see happen. One of the things, and you'll see this on Alabama right now, is we're widening up all the tree wells to increase, remove impervious surface and increase the open area around the root structure. And our understanding and the thinking is that just makes for healthier trees. We're not going to put in any tree grates here. What we're also hearing from our consultant is trees are going to thrive best when they have some sort of either mulch or crushed stone backfill, but not a grate. And then from a maintenance standpoint, that's actually really quite helpful for us, because it's much easier to go up, freshen that up, make sure it's flush, versus trying to cut out chunks of grates and things like that. The Arts District will still have its own grate thing, and that will still be happening, but this is the main downtown. You'll see ADA upgrades at the alley crossings and stuff like that. We will be doing some, curb and gutter replacement here and there, making sure that we wind up with a 6-inch reveal on the curbs, which is basically pedestrian protection. That really covers your street improvements there. We will be bulbing out the 2 corners of Bay Street, heading down to the bridge, right by, right opposite from Bayou there. And that'll be, I think, that's a lot of pedestrian traffic there. It's kind of a lot of pedestrian exposure across Bay on that side, so fix that up as well. So as Ted said, looking at the corridor and then referencing the bicycle master plan, we need to take a hard look at this corridor. I mean, it's a very important corridor for a lot of reasons. And the initial study was, well, we want to put a bicycle facility. We realize that keeping the design aesthetics is important, parking is very important. So the first review will be, okay, well, in lieu, could you remove traffic from one lane and put a bicycle facility there and use 2 lanes with through traffic with proper, left-hand, right-hand turn design? Would that work? And so we're chewing on that right now. We'll go through the options. That is your baseline, but then also looking at a separated bike track, costs associated with that, and then any number of different options. We have concept sketches from the bicycle master plan specific for Holly, so we have a good starting point for that. When we get through that study and have some recommendations, we'll go to the Transportation Commission, work with them, and then again eventually bring it back to council. Anything else on that? No?
No, the one comment on the Holly project is we have a budget identified of 1.5 million, which should be adequate for the overlay and would be adequate for some bicycle improvements. I think if we go through the process and identify a bicycle facility that is, something like a separated facility or something of that nature, we're going to probably have to talk budget and come back to the council in your role as a TBD board and talk about funding. It's a priority project, and I think that we certainly want to take the opportunity while we're in here paving it to put in the right facility, the facility that we want to see and that the community wants to see. We may not have adequate budget identified now. We would just have to come back and have that discussion.
And then to kind of finish things off, at the end of the day, we worked with planning. We'll be making some upgrades to some of the street furniture that you see, trying to consolidate it in a way that puts it in the right place, i.e. adjacent to the trees and that type of thing, keeping your ADA corridors clear. So the aesthetic stuff, we've kind of really let planning take the lead on that. Upgrades to bike racks and stuff like that. So we have placeholder in the budget to do those type of improvements as well.
It would be nice, as we're looking at streetscape amenities, that we solve our sandwich board issue at the same time as you talk about aesthetics. You know, we're looking at street aesthetics, and then we allow this mishmash of stuff that has always been my understanding is illegal.
That thing right there.
Yep.
I would defer to planning on the sandwich boards.
Yeah, I mean, we, the city has been working, planning, Public Works, the police department, legal, on looking at really focusing on the sidewalks, primarily in the commercial core, and making sure that we have adequate clear zones distance so that we meet ADA, and that's been the focus. And whatever that means, it means cafes, sidewalk cafes that might be encroaching, tree wells that Freeman talked about, sandwich board signs, the newspaper racks, all of those things go into that. And we sent a brochure out to the downtown merchants this year, and also to Fairhaven, reminding them about clear zones. We've talked to all of our inspectors and our capital project engineers and worked closely with planning on the same thing. The sandwich board issue is something that the group has looked at, and we'll take your comments and bring those back to the group and see what our next steps might be.
For our legally blind travelers, those things just present a terrible obstacle as they
Yeah, I mean,
predict.
one thing that we did, and I think it was very, very helpful, and Freeman was a part of this along with Heather Higgins when she still worked for Public Works. We met up with a couple members of the blind community and went down and took the opportunity to walk downtown and get their perspective as they negotiated downtown and all the obstacles. And I think we learned quite a bit through that process, and still have those folks that we reach out to and run issues by. But you're right, it's a challenge, and anything that's in the sidewalk pedestrian environment, whether it's our trash and recycling receptacles or any signs, are a challenge.
Thank you.
And you did mention outreach, and so I'll touch on that, as part of the project schedule. So we did the open house. Again, not really the turnout we'd like to see. So the next step is I'm going to work with the Downtown Bellingham Partnership. I'd like to see about using them to do an electronic survey. We have done these before, so I think that would be a good way to kind of get right to people rather than trying to drag them out to an open house, to try to get general comments on all the parts of the project that you've seen today. I've been underneath a bunch of the sidewalk in the last week or two, finding where all the structural sidewalk goes out there, and so I've had a chance to talk to a lot of business as well. So we're developing our own master list, and sandwich boards came up with the folks at the greenhouse, actually. So that's definitely part of the discussion. So we'll basically go through the fall and get that public input, and also develop the options for the bicycle facility. We'll go to TC for a recommendation specifically on the bike facility. We're not looking, they don't care about streetscape stuff, but they'll care about that. We'll get all that together and come back to council first of the year with, here's our overall project layout, here are the options for bicycle facilities, here are the budget impacts, and this is where we are with budget, so on and so forth. And then we nail that down, bid and award in March, and build. And I'm going to be as bullish as I can on this. Talking to one of the retailers down there, she said really the retail doldrums start in February. You have a little leftover cash in January, but that is really the time. It's not a great time. It's never a good time to be right in front of a store. So, but what we heard was, if you can get started in around February and into March or April, that's the best time to have a bunch of stuff going around the store, because your retail sales are generally pretty low anyways. So we're really going to try to bump this up and get that done, because we can do a lot of the ADA upgrades when it's wet, and then try to roll right into paving in June or July, and then let everybody enjoy a new street for the summer. So we're going to really push hard on that.
Good.
And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you folks have.
Any comments? Yeah, Michael.
I have a couple of comments. One, on the sandwich board sign. That issue has been simmering for at least 5 or 6 years. It almost comes forward to the council. It almost comes forward to the council. There's a great deal of conflict between merchants who need the sandwich board signs, but since there are no rules, it's the Wild West. Sometimes they're put in the wrong place, and they do get in the way of the walking path, and for visually handicapped, it's a problem. This isn't for the Public Works folks, but I'm wondering if the administration might be able to bring forward at least the current thinking on that. As you say, several departments have had to coordinate on this. It's not just planning, it's not just Public Works, it's also legal and the police. It'd be nice to see where that is. It's a difficult problem, but it'd be nice to talk about it at some point.
So we have a downtown group. It was the old waterfront downtown group that meets once a week, and it would be a good topic to bring up to them.
Great. And then one more thing. I'd like to give a big shout out to the State Street conceptual plan, which is similar but actually larger and more ambitious than this. That document was just released. If you go to the city website under downtown, you'll be able to look at that. So that is looking at a much longer corridor, all of North State Street, with a wider right-of-way, far more opportunities to do some really exciting things. I guess my comment is it'd be nice to do as much of that kind of exciting redevelopment in this corridor, understanding it's a narrower corridor, it's a high traffic corridor. I mean, there's not as much that can be done, but sort of the pedestrian experiences that I think can be achieved under the North State Street conceptual plan, as much as we can squeeze into this corridor, I think would be really good. I think it would enliven the look and feel, make it a more attractive place to shop, to visit, to live, everything.
And I think you're getting a little of that with the bump outs at the bay, because that really is going to complete that intersection, because that is very much a key crossroads in the city. The Bay Street project, took that travel lane out and that right-hand turn lane years ago, and very successful for that intersection. So we are going to build on that. And all I would say is, as I said before, it was quite visionary to do what they did with the Brick and Bollard already. I mean, those are very large pedestrian spaces, and so we're going to, improve. We're going to bring them up, to today's standards, and maintain that pedestrian area. We'll see what it looks like when we get the final plans done. If there's opportunities for that, we can take a look at adding the funk.
Okay, great. Okay, before we adjourn the committee, I believe Roxanne had some comments she wanted to share with Public Works, some good things.
So thankfully, it's exciting anytime community members come to me and they share positive information, and I really wanted to relay that to Public Works. So a community member approached me and wanted to give great feedback about the Alabama project. And especially he and I agreed. This is Dan Rass, who lives at the top of the Alabama Hill, so you can imagine how much he uses Alabama. And we really thought the construction was going to be so much worse from the beginning, and we were both surprised that traffic didn't really start to get bad until last week. We're not expecting hearts and rainbows out of this. We know it's a big construction project, but at the same time, it's appreciated that traffic has been allowed to go throughout the majority so far. He and I also really appreciated the community outreach, because that's really helping the neighbors understand what to expect out of week in and week out. And just in general, we know it was probably best for the project to work 4/10s and have Fridays off, but boy, did this help the community too. And I'll just say from my perspective, after a busy week, I just want to get to one magical place, and that's home. And so, we just are grateful for how hard the contractor has been working, how hard Public Works has been working, and we appreciated it.
Thank you.
Okay, appreciate that.
And one other really quick piece of feedback that I also received was a community member appreciated that a generator was in their neighborhood throughout this power outage that we had last weekend. So I know Public Works was working hard and overtime on that, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. A big weekend for everybody, Parks and Public Works and Emergency Services. I think Eric had a full crew out most of the day on Saturday and Sunday, and a big part of that is making sure that all of our 63 remote pumping stations, so we have about 60 lift stations and pump stations throughout our entire service area. Many of them have on-site generations, but some don't, and so we have to bring generators out to make sure that we keep those pump stations working. So thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, okay, so
Yeah,
seeing
very
nothing
nice,
else, committee's adjourned.